The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
The masks, the tests, forced shutdowns, the school closures, the lockdowns in your home, the experimental toxic injections, the closing of houses of worship.
We were told that every other human being is a vector of disease, and all of our rights went away. We haven't really dealt with the implications of this as a nation.
And that's why Children's Health Defense and many other groups, we are all joined together in something called COVID Justice.
COVID Justice Resolution.
The COVID Justice Resolution is a formal proposal urging the United States Senate to do the following.
Repudiate the most harmful COVID-era emergency policies. Reaffirm that constitutional rights do not disappear in a public health crisis. Establish binding guardrails on future emergency powers and protect bodily autonomy, free speech, religious liberty, and due process. This resolution is about principle. Emergencies do not suspend the Constitution.
We must have a reckoning that at a minimum says that they won't do this again. They won't abrogate the Constitution and everything that we hold dear.
And we have to, because there are many people, very powerful people in high places, including at the World Health Organization, who think we should repeat this all over again if there is another pandemic.
There's a petition at covidjustice.org. We have tens of thousands of signatures already.
You should sign the petition. If you haven't, go to www.covidjustice.org.
Good morning, America. Good morning, world. Good morning, CHD. Welcome. Once again, my name is Michael Kane. I'm the Director of Advocacy here at Children's Health Defense. And today we're going over a smoking gun, new legal document that shows New York City workers were fired illegally, the unvaccinated. We have attorneys Jimmy Wagner and Sujata Gibson on to go over that. After that, microwave weapon causing Havana syndrome with our EMR department, Miriam Eckenfels and Scott McCollough. You don't want to miss any of this. Stick around for the whole thing. But first, as always, we have news. COVID Justice, covidjustice.org. As you just saw, please make sure to sign that petition, spread it around. We want the U.S. Senate to pick this up and actually say, we won't do this again. No federal body has said any such a thing. Matter of fact, yesterday, the Religious Liberty Commission met and discussed vaccination and religious liberty. Teachers for Choice sent an open letter to the Religious Liberty Commission. So did Bravest for Choice. They sent an open letter to the Religious Liberty Commission as well, too. And Children's Health Defense has done so as well, too. That letter is not public yet. It will be soon. As soon as it is, it's an open letter from Mary Holland to the Religious Liberty Commission with the amazing work that Children's Health Defense has done regarding religious freedom, especially when it comes to vaccination. But yesterday, the big news that kind of just wiped out all of this in a way, Robert F. Kennedy's ACIP meeting canceled by a judge. A federal judge has actually granted an injunction to the AAP suing HHS, which is for now nullifying the ACIP committee that Bobby Kennedy put together and canceling the ACIP meeting on vaccine injury for March 18th. Now, this is going to be appealed. It'll go up the chain to appellate court. 99.9% sure this will go to the Supreme Court. I'm hoping Secretary Kennedy has 5 votes over at SCOTUS. I actually think he does. But tomorrow, Attorney Rick Jaffe is going to be coming on to discuss this. Children's Health Defense wrote an amicus brief to this case in particular. Rick has done amazing work around this and is watching this very carefully. Don't miss CHD TV tomorrow. I definitely want to hear Rick's updates on all of this. One other piece of news I want to go over before we go over this smoking gun new document and what it means for fired unvaccinated workers in New York City. Connecticut has some outrageous laws attempting to be passed, not going down without a fight. Hundreds testify against kinetic bills expanding state vaccine powers. Check it out at the Capitol in Connecticut. We have a video of what that looked like. Let's roll that.
So they want to come up with a mandated vaccine schedule, not only for children but for adults, and I think that is ridiculous to have to take away rights and freedoms that we fought hard for.
Look at the other states. Look what the measles epidemics. Look at how much slower they were to get people, free of COVID because they were reluctant to use vaccines in a prudent way that keeps you safe.
That sounds completely fake to me, actually, Government Lamont. I don't think you're citing anything scientific or factual about what happened with the spread of COVID based on vaccination. That was Governor Lamont in Connecticut. Connecticut is one of the 5 states that does not have a religious exemption to vaccination. They're actually trying to implement an adult vaccine schedule, codify it in Connecticut. But in addition to that, they are trying to say that the state's RFRA law, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, applies in the state to everything except vaccines. So that is a new thing they're trying to do in Connecticut. Our brothers and sisters in Connecticut are fighting against that. And we're going to have more information, more news on that in the week ahead. We hope to have some of the activists on CHD TV to get into the details of what's happening there and what we can do. All right. And with that, I want to now bring on my 2 guests to talk about the smoking gun legal documents that may change everything for fired unvaccinated workers in New York City. We have civil rights attorneys Jimmy Wagner and Sujata Gibson. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Okay, Jimmy, I want to get into you here. You took a very unique angle. You did many things, but one of your angles for dealing with the injustice, the constitutional violations of unvaccinated workers in New York City is you went in deep into FOIL requests. And you've been doing this for, I believe, 4 years or more. Why don't you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. So for the people who don't know, FOIL, Freedom of Information Law, New York State is very, we're right at the forefront. We're supposed to have everything. Everything under the law is presumed available for public review. So in 2021, when all this is breaking down, I start sending out FOIL requests to every single organization, government agency in the city of New York who had anything to do with the imposition of the vaccine mandate. So while I'm doing this, New York City Department of Health, Mental Hygiene and Health, they send me back a FOIL response, thousands and thousands of documents. Total, like an unbelievable link with thousands of documents. There's lots of items in there, but then as I'm going through the documents, certain documents are redacted. That it didn't make any sense why these documents should be redacted. And they're not just a little redaction. As you can see, they left me the to, the from, and then everything 9-page emails redacted. So I tried to work diligently to explain why these items shouldn't have been redacted. The attorneys for the city argued against it. That FOIL request is done in 2021. After almost a year of negotiating with the city, they still wouldn't unredact it. I had to file my own lawsuit. Well, I'm the named plaintiff. I filed that lawsuit in 2023. The lower court denies me. I then have to turn around and bring it to the appeals court. So here's something that's very interesting for everyone to consider. The courts are looking at this document unredacted. It was sent to the court for an in-camera review. So the lower court judge sees this entire document unredacted. There's no protections afforded to it under FOIL law, but he upholds the redactions. I still don't know what it is, so I'm walking into court as the only party who doesn't know what's in this email. And it puts me at a huge disadvantage because there are certain provisions of FOIL where certain items should be redacted. Moving forward, the appellate courts, the Second Department, has this entire document unredacted. While they're seeing this document unredacted, let's not make light of the fact that they're reviewing all of the lawsuits I'm bringing, Sujata's bringing, every other attorney is bringing. So they know this email exists. They know it's in there. Clearly, everyone in the courthouse gets to see the email. Jim Wagner doesn't get to see it. The plaintiff and petitioner's attorneys don't get to see it. Everyone in court counsel sees what's in this email, and they're literally arguing out of both sides of their mouth because court counsel is like, oh, of course, everything we did was truthful and honorable and with integrity, and we would never look to deny people of their religious rights. And then in the same breath, they have this, what I call is a smoking gun piece of evidence that shows the city from the beginning believed that anyone making a religious accommodation request, especially as it was associated to abortion, it was BS. That's their language, BS, in capital letters.
So Jimmy, I actually, here it is. This is from an attorney, Steve Banks, not the head of Corp Counsel, but another Corp Counsel lawyer that has that same name. We could give that detail in a second. Let's just read this. Writing about religious exemptions, people are asking. Quote, since many of these cases are going to labor arbitrators, there is a need for factual information for the arbitrators to reference. It would be very, very helpful if we could get a document signed off on by a city doctor that essentially makes the argument as to why this is BS. The purpose of the document would be for the arbitrators to reference, and I would vet it with the UFT first. Okay, so a couple of things there. So we have this document. On this chain is the Commissioner of Health, Chosky. Jay Varma is on there. Extremely important public health figure at the time in New York City. And here we have a Corp Counsel lawyer calling a sincerely held religious belief BS as they are working to have evidence to thwart sincerely held religious belief. The last thing I want to reference here is he then says, I am going to vet this with the UFT. That is outside of the government. Those who are supposed to be representing me, of course, I'm a fired unvaccinated worker, for those who don't know, and I got hit by this. So to me, it's almost a vast conspiracy that's happening in the city. Within the government, there's improper things happening, but also even beyond. I said a lot there. Not even sure what my question is, Jim, but why don't you talk to all of this? Because this is kind of shocking.
It's beyond shocking, right? And I agree with you. I think also it's important to understand this. One point is the lawyers are emailing city health doctors, Jay Varma, Chosky, saying, here is a document we're creating for litigation, right? And I'm paraphrasing what's in this email. They create a document for litigation. They want to vet it with lawyers. They want a doctor to sign off. So this wasn't an honest document created by the doctors. It was a document created by lawyers that the doctors that work for the city sign off on, that is then presented to the arbitrator. As an attorney who helped many teachers through this arbitration that did a lot of work here, I am telling you, we were never given the opportunity to present our own expert documents. So we have a document that's being back-channeled to the arbitrators and the prepared for litigation. And I think if you take a look at the memo, that's the final version, it's unique in that it comes from New York City's Hospital and Health or New York City Department of Health. It has Chosky's name up top, but it's formatted like a letter, but at the end, there's no signature. So even this lawyer litigated, created document, they present it as a letter from a doctor. The doctors that work for the city wouldn't even sign off on it. And then it's presented over to the arbitrator that has the sole control of the UFT arbitrations, that we know how many of the people were denied their religious accommodations for what I believe were totally unconstitutional religious reasons. They weren't part of Christian Scientists. Right.
Yes. So, Jimmy, you bring this right to the space where I want to bring Sujata in, because as this is all happening, which we had suspicions it was happening, but now we know in black letter documentation this was happening. I was in front of one of those arbitrators. Sujata Gibson was my attorney at the time. And they literally were saying to me that since the Pope, recommended vaccination, the Dalai Lama himself was vaccinated, I should be vaccinated. We went to court. We sued on this. And in October of 2021, we were in the Southern District Court in front of Judge Valerie Caproni. Here was one of the rallies that happened in front of the courthouse as Sujata was inside arguing with Valerie Caproni about what was happening. And Bill de Blasio's statements came up. Bill de Blasio said on record that only Christian Scientists and Jehovah's Witnesses, people with recognized religions, would be getting religious exemptions. And Sujata argued that that was illegal. And Caproni said that was only de Blasio's opinion. He wasn't speaking from any official standpoint. He was giving his own opinion. Sujata, now that we have this document here, why don't you take us back to that time and in this case and what Caproni was arguing? Please speak to this.
Yes. So in First Amendment law, you have to show that there was a lack of neutrality in issuing a law if you want to get strict scrutiny, which is the only way you really get a judge or a court to look at whether it was valid to deny your accommodation request. So early on in the case, Judge Caproni said, well, the city issued the law, not the DOE. So the only evidence she saw that the city was taking this position that was discriminating against all these employees, in her mind, was this Bill de Blasio statement that literally said, we plan to discriminate against all these groups. But, you know, the court said, well, that could just be his opinion. He could just be saying his opinion. We don't have any evidence the city was involved whatsoever in these accommodation processes at the DOE. Now we get this smoking gun chain. It's not just what you just saw on the screen. This is pages long, and it's the highest level city officials working for the city and the Commissioner of Health's office, calling people's religious beliefs BS, scheming ways to get information to the arbitrators to get them denied. And they don't just stop at abortion. So there's a lot in this chain. One of the things is they say, you know, we want to say that there's no connection to abortion. And they cite this Department of Health website from North Dakota that they think says that. They read it over and in the chain they say, well, you know, it's actually not as strong as we had hoped. It's a little more neutral than that. You know, essentially there were aborted fetal cell lines used to test these vaccines and in some cases do more. And so they couldn't say there was none. So what they just said is, Dr. Chokshi, can you instead say, we can go further and you can instead say, even if they were used, the Pope and other people don't think that's a problem, so there's no religious problem here. And he said, sure, I'm fine with saying that, and it made it into the letter. So that's a huge constitutional problem. Not only does that wipe neutrality off the, you know, there's no neutrality here. The city was involved from, you know, nuts to bolts in this DOE process. They can't hide it anymore. This email shows it. The commissioner himself was involved, the one who issued the mandate. This is not a neutral mandate anymore. It needs strict scrutiny. So we plan to bring that up in all our lawsuits, which I'll discuss in a minute. But we have another problem. Government officials under the U.S. Constitution Establishment Clause cannot lend their power to a religious dispute. So this is a great example of that, right? There's this split in the Catholic Church. Many Catholics, including Pope Francis, felt, yes, there's this connection to abortion, but you know, I feel like other concerns override it. I've consulted my religious conscience, prayed, and I feel like I can take it. A whole other council of Catholic bishops and other Catholics said, we don't feel the same way. And everybody agreed that Catholics needed to consult their own religious conscience over the issue. So when you have the Commissioner of Health lending his power, literally lending his power to resolve a religious question like this and say there is no religious conflict, and telling arbitrators to say that to people, that's a huge constitutional problem. I think this is the biggest Establishment Clause violation that we have seen in modern decades.
Wow.
You do not, I mean, we have not seen this kind of evidence. The cases that have gone to the Supreme Court are far less egregious than this. It's, you know, saying, well, if you only allow religious organizations that get a certain percentage from membership, the collections plate, then, you're discriminating against religions that don't have a collections plate, or, things like that. This is a health official actually saying, I've decided there's no religious dispute here. I think, arbitrators, you need to look at what the Pope said and deny people who feel differently.
So I want to draw attention to another piece of corruption that happened with Judge Caproni, and that happened in the Kane versus de Blasio case. This was happening while all these things behind the scenes were happening. It was one of the first cases. Judge Caproni had to recuse herself from the case, and we actually have a flyer of that. Lou, let's put that up, showing Judge Caproni owned big pharma stock, between $50,000 and $100,000 in Pfizer stock. Then Judge Edgardo Ramos came on. He owned pharma stock in 7 companies. He recused himself within 24 hours of being the judge. And then finally, we had Naomi Buchwald, who owned up to $250,000 in Pfizer and other stock. She did not recuse herself. She stayed on and ended up ruling against the plaintiffs. The majority of her opinion ended up sticking in the Kane versus de Blasio case, except for 2 plaintiffs who did win. I would say are in a position to win once it went to the appeals court. So that's a different piece. But it just seems like the case that I was named on is overshadowed with corruption on top of corruption on top of corruption here. It's almost a little overwhelming to be hearing all of this as someone that went through this.
Go on.
Okay, Sujata, I just want to say in reference to, and I think Sujata can support this, in 2021, 2022, they were not letting us as attorneys get any discovery on any of these cases. That was part and parcel of why I went about doing all these FOIL requests. They were not giving us any discovery. And if in fact, after reviewing this email now, I'm confident in 2021, if they give me this email unredacted as they legally should have, 2021, the environment there, the judges still would have found a way to say, to give them government what the government wanted. Now in 2026, it's clear in my mind, the cover-up is just as bad as the crime. Like, they actively fought me. I want to just say thank you to Mr. Joseph Aaron, New York State's probably one of the premier FOIL attorneys, who came on board this case with me to show me and mentor me to show me how we're going to win this. And we won it. And we got these documents, and
Jimmy,
it's amazing.
Jimmy Wagner's been fighting for this for a long time. He has family who is impacted just as I was impacted on this. He's invested almost $200,000 into this area, this FOIL area. Nobody's done this in New York City except for Jimmy Wagner. Jimmy, thank you so much. This opens up a whole new ball of wax for what might be potential. Sujata, you had said to me off camera, I hope I can say this, that there is the potential that the Kane case, which is now basically done, there is talks about looking at it again, that there maybe that it could reopen again. Is that possible? Is that not?
Yeah, just to clarify, the Kane case isn't done. It's still ongoing. It's just that some of the plaintiffs were dismissed, but I do think this is grounds to reopen that, and that is something we're investigating. And certainly to put it in as supplemental information on all the other pending cases, because there's hundreds of cases pending still, and we're starting to settle and win those cases on summary judgment or, motions to dismiss. And so what Jimmy found is huge, and the timing couldn't be better. I think we do have a shot of using it. I can't promise about reopening the old cases, but certainly of bringing in new. This is very damaging. I mean, the stuff we touched on is only part of it. One of the worst things I just really quickly want to get out there, because I think this is really important, is they fired thousands of people, not just at DOE, but in all the city agencies, for failing to say that they also didn't take Tylenol. They actually had a secret test at the police department where they never even asked. But if you didn't think to say, I don't take Tylenol, you were automatically disqualified from religious accommodation. This email chain shows they had no basis for that. They admit they couldn't find anything to back up the fact that Tylenol also used aborted fetal cell lines to come to market. And in fact, they didn't. Another attorney, Christina Martinez, and her partner, Jeanette Loiacono, they actually wrote to the companies and said, do you use that? Did you bring them to market with any kind of fetal cell line testing? And they said, no, absolutely not. And the only place that the city found this information was from a blog. And they admit in the email chain they couldn't verify it in any other source. So just let that sink in. I mean, they fired thousands of people based on something they knew was a lie.
Oh my God. Yeah. And it's just so many lives were ruined. You know, I say this all the time. I know teachers with master's degrees driving Ubers. I know firefighters and kitchen workers that were made homeless because of these mandates. And now we know for sure, without question, there was ample corruption involved in firing good people who this never had to happen to. Sujata Gibson, Jimmy Wagner, our time is up here. But both of you are going to be in Albany on March 24th, 1 week from today, rally at the Capitol. Everybody should be coming out. Mary Holland, Sujata Gibson, Naomi Wolf, vaccine-injured firefighter O'Brien Pastrana, and many vaccine-injured individuals are going to be there. We're going to be focusing in on this. In lieu, it's interesting that the ACIP committee hearing focusing on vaccine-injured individuals was canceled, but this rally's not canceled. So everybody in the Northeast, make sure you come out. We're going to be talking about this and so many other things. Jimmy and Sujata, thank you so much for all the work that you do, all this great work, and thanks for coming on and educating my audience today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for having us.
Smoking gun evidence. Sujata Gibson said this might be one of the biggest violations of the First Amendment she has ever seen. Stay tuned. We're going to have more on that. Don't go anywhere. Havana syndrome and EMR. Let's turn it over to Miriam Eckenfels.
Well, good morning, CHD, and welcome to another EMR and Wireless update. My name is Miriam Eckenfels, and I am the director of CHD's EMR and Wireless program. I'm excited to talk to our lead litigator, Scott McCollough, today about two exciting and fast-moving topics. First, we're going to talk about winning the 6G race, and then we're going to be talking about directed energy weapons and the Havana syndrome. But before we bring Scott on, I want to remind everyone that our 704 No More March campaign, Spring Clean Your Wireless World, is still active. And I would like to encourage everyone to participate. Spring Clean Your Wireless World is an easy two-step process that helps you first identify harmful wireless sources in your home, and then second, remedy your wireless exposure to create a safer home for yourself and your children. We have ready-to-go resources, and you can follow our easy checklists and join the Spring Clean Your Wireless World challenge. Let us know how it's going by posting pictures about your wireless sources or what you do to remedy them, and tagging 704 No More on all major platforms. So now let's dive into today's discussion. First, as I said, we're going to be talking about winning the 6G race. So on December 19, the White House published a memorandum titled Winning the 6G Race, wherein they said that the next generation of mobile communication networks, 6G, will be foundational to the national security, foreign policy, and economic prosperity of the United States. This technology will play a pivotal role in the development and adoption of emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, robotics, and implantable technologies. 6G will also provide faster, more resilient, and more secure communication networks that can be utilized for national security and public safety purposes. So to discuss this, I want to welcome our lead litigator for EMR and wireless cases, Scott McCollough. Welcome, Scott.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. So what I just read sounds exciting, doesn't it?
Well, look, I'm a technophobe. I love technology, and from that perspective, this stuff is amazing and exquisite. All the engineering in it and all the technical stuff that's going on is truly astounding. There's just no getting around it. But when it comes down to what this means for normal people and what it will do for you, more important, what it's going to do to you, I don't think it's exciting at all. In fact, it scares me to death.
Right. How about we take a step back, and I want to ask you sort of like an introductory question. Well, when they say 6G, what is that? What are we even talking about?
Well, 6G is just a number which designates what generation of wireless technology we are. We started out with 1G. It was those big old bag phones. It was all analog. Then we began to evolve slowly. 2G was also analog. It's when we started getting more mobile phones that people could actually use. Some of the first flip phones, actually. Then 3G started to come along, and they began to weave digital technology into it. 4G, what was also called LTE or long-term evolution, is all digital. It completed standards in about 2008 for commercial rollout, was upgraded in 2011. Some further refinements improved efficiency, facilitated multiple in, multiple out antennas, and allowed for a word I'm going to be using a lot here later on, higher order modulation. And really started then laying the groundwork for what we now call 5G. 5G the standards were finalized in 2018, rollout in 2019. This new air interface made a lot of things programmable on the fly, allowed for very tight beamforming, another term we're going to use in a minute. The final release to that is being completed now, and then we will start the run up to 6G. By most accounts, 6G standards should complete around 2029, with commercial rollout about 2030. But we're already seeing some test bed equipment starting to happen. And what I suspect occurred and generated this executive order is that the Chinese recently began putting out some pre-standards gear. There's been reports that they could achieve 206 gigabits per second in the lab using terahertz, very high frequency. And they launched some test satellites that are trying the pre-standards gear for space to air to ground integration. I think what happened was the administration saw all this and they didn't want to be caught flat-footed like they were when the Russians beat us to crude airspace, space flight in 1961. So they're rushing ahead to try to catch up. This is like the space race.
Right. And so is this really about sort of like more and faster connectivity? You said, like in the incredible amounts of data that can be transferred in a very short period of time. Do we need that? And what are some of the issues that you see with 6G?
Well, high-speed data transmission is a good thing. That's why we have fiber, and that's why we need fiber to the home. I think what you're really asking is, do people need this with a cell phone so that they can walk around and do all of these things? And frankly, the answer is no. 4G or LTE really did provide all the capability normal mobile end users require. 5G improved that a little bit, but in terms of just basic consumer use, we don't need 5G and we certainly won't need 6G. It's more about automation. It's more about sensing. It's more about artificial intelligence. It's an industrial, commercial, and government use case, not for normal people. Even if you want to be able to watch cat videos while walking down the street or sitting on the beach, this is not for us.
Right. But then they said in the executive order that they, the AI, obviously that makes sense, sort of like the Internet of Things, different devices communicating to each other, robotics. But then they said implantable technologies. What is that about?
Well, we already have some implantable technologies, but what 6G will allow us to do is really make the next transition to the human network interface, implantable brain devices, many other things, the so-called Internet of Bodies. What they want to do is allow for small transmitters, receivers that can attach to the body or even be implanted in the body that will then communicate and I guess ultimately do something like Musk's Neuralink, which would actually allow autonomous communication between our bodies and the network. We would be cyborgs.
That's just wild and scary, and I'm sure there is like an entire host of issues associated with that technology. But talk to us a little bit about sort of like 5G, because in all the discussions about the development of technology, we sort of like skip over the health and privacy concerns of 5G, and we're now just lunging into the 6G discussion. So don't we already see a lot of issues with 5G technologies? And like tell our viewers a little bit about that technology, why it is challenging, why people are getting sick, what's unique about 5G, and maybe that 6G is going to build upon.
Yeah, here is where I need to use some terms that maybe folks have come across when they're looking at this Havana syndrome thing that we're going to talk about in a minute. The thing about 5G, and then of course even more so with 6G, is the advanced capabilities that exist with regard to the network and the antennas that allow for very, very precise modulation and pulsation. Now, let me try to translate those terms. Pulsation is just a pulse. It's a rhythm. It's a repeating change. It doesn't necessarily carry a message. It's just a pattern. You'll hear pulsation, and I'm going to explain why people use that term in a minute, but modulation is really what's going on here. That's when you intentionally change something about a signal so it can carry information. It's how messages are sent through the air. If you were to take a flashlight and make it brighter and dimmer to send Morse code, change the time of drum beats to communicate. That's how wireless systems operate, but with radio waves. They can change amplitude, which is how strong the wave is, frequency, how fast it wiggles, phase, the timing of the wave, pulse characteristics, how long or often the pulses occur, and amplitude is the strength of a wave, while phase is the timing. Now, these control changes actually encode data, like letters, numbers, or internet traffic. So, if you're looking off in the distance and you see a lighthouse and it just blinks on and off at a steady pace, that's pulsation. But if the blinking pattern changes to send a signal like Morse code, or gets brighter and dimmer in a prescribed way, that's pulsation. That's modulation. Now, the reports we're talking about here refer to pulsation, but that's really a misnomer. We're not just talking about on-off or changing timing. What 5G did and does, and 6G will do, is transmit very, very specifically in lots of time slots, bursts, short transmission, gaps, and rapid on-off activity. It's really controlled pulses, better described as bursts, time-scheduled transmitted symbols that the user equipment can decode. It can interpret. It speaks the same language. They look and feel like pulses because the waveform is rising. It lasts briefly, and then falls with very sharp edges. People use the term pulse to convey the basic, not the technical understanding. So what does all this mean? Well, our user equipment understands what is going on. It can communicate with the network. It speaks the same language. Our bodies, however, we're not understanding the information that is being transmitted, but we very much do respond to these bursts and the sharp rises and fall offs and the very different timing. Think about maybe being in a ballroom. Many of us grew up in the disco area and they had these disco balls. You go in there and they'd be reflecting light all over the place, bunch of lights, different colors, bunch of different timing. One can be disorienting, but you get like 100 or 1,000 of those things in the same room, it'll put you on the floor. And this is the same thing that our bodies do. It's basically just overstimulation. We don't know how to respond, and bad things start happening.
Right. And so with like 6G potentially using even higher frequency, and then 5G also being in the air and that 4G also being in the air, what you're saying is that it just sort of like increases this invisible pollution almost, the lights in the ballroom as we like evolve to different generations of technology.
Yeah. Well, 6G, first of all, it's going to incorporate higher frequency bands. 4G used, and I'm sorry about the technical terms, about 410 megahertz to 2600 megahertz. 5G can use all those plus up to about 71 gigahertz. And 6G is going to scale up to about 3000 gigahertz or 3 terahertz. And again, I got to repeat, 5G didn't do much to improve voice communications, and 6G won't either. The use case is data, and specifically AI-enabled data. What's going to happen is we're just going to replace our current elites with tortuous digital overlords that are going to use this for surveillance and societal control. It's the last gate to the digital prison.
Right. So it's definitely something to be paying attention to. And I want to encourage our users to let their elected officials know that there are, our viewers rather, to let their elected officials know that there are implications, that this is a discussion worth having, both on the health and the environmental effects of RF radiation, but also in terms of all of the other concerns in terms of privacy and data collection that we always highlight. If you would like to learn more about different technologies, we have a lot of resources available on 704nomore.org, so you can check us out there. And one thing that Scott mentioned in particular was like the pulsation of these RF waves, the bursts, right, and then being incredibly harmful to the human body. And so this launches nicely into our next discussion on the Havana syndrome and directed energy weapons, which is really, really interesting. So on March 8th, 60 Minutes aired a segment called Havana Syndrome Investigation is a Massive CIA Cover-Up. And it's very an interesting piece. It's actually the fourth piece in a series of 60 Minutes that they have done on the Havana syndrome. And the Defender reported on this yesterday. And I want to read a little bit about the article so that we can set the stage. So U.S. agents secretly purchased a portable microwave weapon capable of causing brain injuries like those reported in the Havana syndrome cases. And we'll get to what the Havana syndrome victims go through in a minute. So according to a new investigation that 60 Minutes conducted, the device, small enough to carry in a backpack and powerful enough to send a beam through walls and windows, was reportedly obtained from a Russian criminal network in a covert 2024 operation funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. U.S. officials tested this still classified weapon for more than a year at a military laboratory, and experiments on rats and sheep produced injuries similar to those reported by American diplomats, intelligence officers, and military personnel who say they were struck by an unseen force. So what happened throughout the years is that diplomats, hundreds of them from all over the world, reported these incidents of being struck by this unseen force and suffering detrimental health impacts from, loss of cognitive functions, blindness, loss of hearing, tinnitus, difficulty sleeping, neurological damage. Some of them had, other physiological reactions. And that was sort of like, attributed to them making it up. So they were essentially ridiculed for decades. Let's have a look at what some of these people went through, and then we'll talk about it.
The worst pain I have ever felt, it felt like a vice gripping my brainstem, was there.
All in your own home?
All in my home in Northern Virginia. And Heidi was within my proximity for the last 2 attacks.
Heidi, what happened to you?
Right at the beginning of January, I woke up with immense joint pain everywhere, with shoulder pain in my left shoulder, out of the blue, no trauma.
Bones in her shoulder were dissolving, something called osteolysis. She had to have surgery. Has there been any lasting effect?
Significant. So I'm on 2 neurological drugs every day. And without them, I have very severe symptoms. I had sustained significant damage to multiple organ systems.
You believe you were attacked?
Yes.
By a foreign adversary?
Yes.
In the line of duty?
Yes.
This Commerce Department official in China.
And I could feel this sound in my head. It was intense pressure on both of my temples.
This early victim was among cases from Cuba, which gave the mystery the name Havana syndrome.
Severe ear pain started. So I liken it to if you put a Q-tip too far and you bounce off your eardrum. Well, imagine taking a sharp pencil and just kind of poking that.
Mark Polymeropoulos rose to an executive level at the CIA, about the equivalent of a 3-star general. He was awarded a top decoration for service. In 2017, he says he was overwhelmed in a hotel room in Moscow.
I woke up in the middle of the night. I didn't hear any sound, but I woke up with incredible vertigo. The room was spinning. I had a blinding headache. I had tinnitus ringing in my ears, and I felt like I was going to be physically sick. It was a terrifying feeling where I'd lost control. Something that seriously happened to me, and I remember feeling, that this is so unusual. I'd been shot at in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd been in physical danger, but this was terrifying.
Wow. Scott, opening up the discussion, do the symptoms described in this video remind you of something we hear about a lot in our line of work?
These are the classic symptoms of EMR syndrome. And frankly, that's what the diplomats have. It's just very acute. They have the same thing that up to 30% of the population of the United States may be suffering right now, just to different degrees. Classic EMRS.
Right. So what you mentioned is that sort of like this EMR syndrome, as it is now called, formerly called electromagnetic sensitivity or electromagnetic hypersensitivity, microwave sickness, like there's different terminologies, but it's essentially people reacting to RF radiation. And national studies suggest that up to 30% of the population feel some form of electromagnetic sensitivity, even if they don't connect the dots, right? So some of these milder symptoms, about 5%, I believe, are severely affected enough that they connect the dots and know sort of like, okay, I suffer from electromagnetic radiation syndrome. And then about 1 or 2% are so severely affected that it impacts major life forms and they can be considered disabled by it. And so it's very interesting because 60 Minutes frames this discussion in terms of like the energy weapon. So, Scott, tell us a little bit about like what you think this unseen force appears to be and why it is relevant to our work. And then we'll watch another clip where they explain it from their perspective.
It's a directed energy weapon. And I want you to notice the timing. They started describing this around 2017. Remember that LTE and its newest advanced technologies, including MIMO and some of the early phases of beamforming, came out in 2008. And then LTE Advanced came out a little bit before 2017. But for a long time, in my prior work, I did a lot of work in the privacy area. And I look at the descriptions of this equipment and what it says it is done. And I think that's a Stingray device, which is basically a cell site simulator. They're called Stingrays because that was the first model. This too was developed by the CIA. And it too came out even during the analog days. And what it does is it looks like and acts like a base station so that cell phones and other mobile devices connect to it, thinking it's connecting to a tower. And what that does is it allows the CIA and now law enforcement to kind of track and surveil what you're doing. To me, this is just the next model of a Stingray device. They've incorporated beamforming. They're using newer antennas. And yes, Stingrays fit in the backpack too. And what's important to understand here is, this is not just something that was developed by some hostile foreign adversary. We have this gear too, and we have for a long time. So yes, maybe these diplomats were attacked by a foreign adversary who had it too, but our government has this as well. They've developed it. And this is not just some revelation that a bunch of Russian criminals built a box in some garage somewhere. We have this too. And we have been using it, including in Venezuela.
Right. I want to see if we can draw some of the parallels between sort of like these directed energy weapons and the technology that harms people in different forms. So why don't we look at the next clip together?
The official word published in 2023 and still standing says it is very unlikely these are attacks by a foreign adversary. Do you believe the victims?
Absolutely. What we're hearing about now is
Dr. David Relman is a Stanford University professor of medicine asked by the government to lead 2 investigations. His panels included doctors, physicists, engineers, and others. Their reports in 2020 and 2022 proposed a theory.
the 2 panels, the investigations that I know well, both concluded much the same, which was that the most plausible explanation for a subset of these cases was a form of radio frequency or microwave energy.
In a previous story on this mystery, we found a 2014 reference to a weapon. Compelled by a lawsuit, the National Security Agency confirmed intelligence of a high-powered microwave system weapon associated with a hostile country. But the CIA believed such a weapon would need enormous power and be as big as a truck, so not likely. Years later, when Dr. Relman's expert panel suggested these could be microwave injuries, the idea was shelved by federal officials.
Isn't it fascinating that they would shelve that idea? But also, like, it wasn't in this segment, but the way, this doctor described sort of like their finding was that, what made these microwaves, these RF radiation waves so potent was the pulsation, right, that they use. Similar to what you explained earlier, some of the more modern wireless technologies use pulsation for, and it might be a different pulsation or a different modulation, and obviously like a different intensity. But can you explain to our viewers some of the parallels between, that and what's currently in use?
Well, I think that this is equipment that could almost be taken off the shelf using 5G and what we're already seeing in terms of 6G capable devices. Some of the reports I read soon after the 60 Minutes episode indicated there was a classified White House briefing not too long ago where they were told that the same signal or bursted energy used to evoke Havana syndrome can be transmitted to any wireless receiver, including even cell phones, potentially turning them into programmable neurological weapons. And frankly, looking at the standards, and I lived inside these standards for a long time in my former life, that's technically feasible. 5G uses similar multiplexing on the uplink and downlink side. And we know that cell phones already cause EMRF, along with all the other transmitting devices. To me, this is just purpose-built equipment that our government has had for a long time. It doesn't have to be that big, and it doesn't require a ton of energy.
Right. And it's just interesting and significant that this is now being discussed in 60 Minutes. And I think it's an opening to discuss sort of like the impact of wireless technologies on the human body more broadly. I want to summarize and sort of like, really highlight that a significant revelation in this 60 Minute segment, and I encourage all of our viewers to watch the entire segment, was that this segment associates Havana syndrome with directed energy and RF radiation. And the important point here to note is that RF radiation is the directed energy used to cause the Havana syndrome. And this is the same type of radiation that is produced by our wireless technology, including cell phones, cell towers, and all digital devices. 60 Minutes highlights that Havana syndrome is caused by this unique pulsation of RF radiation, but it did not highlight that these similar radiation characteristics are also used in modern wireless communication. Although not as acute, the symptoms of Havana syndrome, such as headaches, tinnitus, heart palpitation, arrhythmia, memory loss, brain fog, loss of cognitive functions, difficulty sleeping, and so on, are also observed and reported after exposure to wireless radiation. The telecommunications industry has been claiming for years that this type of non-thermal radiation is absolutely harmless, but this claim is contradicted by what is reported in the 60 Minute segment, what we already know, and what thousands of peer-reviewed studies show, and by what many people experience when they are exposed to wireless radiation, whether they connect the dots or not. So again, I encourage everyone to watch the entire 60 Minute segment and think for yourself. I think it's a great way to also start conversations and to dive into learning more about this issue. So Scott, thank you very much for joining us today. As always, it's been a pleasure. And for our viewers, I encourage you to follow us on social media at Stop 5G Near Me, where we put out timely and important information, educational materials, action alerts. We are on all major platforms. You can also join the conversation at 704knowmore.org, where you can subscribe to our email list and be kept up to date what is happening in terms of 4G, 5G, 6G rollout in our neighborhoods and communities, what's happening on the federal level, and how you can help take action, educate yourself, and educate others. With that being said, I'm now turning over to the People's Study Story of the Day.
All right, we are live. Can you tell us your name, please?
Sure, it's Dawn Kirkpatrick.
And you are?
I am Chris Kirkpatrick, Dawn's husband.
Okay, thank you for being here. All right, so let's get through this story. So basically, it's about your dad, and he took, to our knowledge, your knowledge, to Moderna's.
Correct.
Do you know why he did that?
No, I had gone to them. I don't live that far. They live pretty close to me, and I had gone to them and said, I have a bad feeling about this. Please, can you hold off? Don't do anything right away. Let's see what happens. I just have a very bad feeling about this. And so at that point he said, okay. He did at that point have what I call a very mild dementia. So he had a hard time sometimes grabbing names or, just like, where are my keys, that type of thing. And they said, oh, it's, just the beginnings of dementia. But he was running a business. He had a couple businesses he was running still from home. and even though he had retired from his main business. But so he promised me he wasn't going to. I went in another time, 2 weeks later, mentioned it again. Guys, please, don't do this right now. Let's just see what happens. I have a bad feeling about it. I just can't explain it, but I have a bad feeling. And again, he said, okay. Well, I guess I came back the next time, it was a few weeks later, and he was having a hard time walking and talking. And I looked at my mom, and I'm like, what's going on? She said, I don't know, he's not feeling very well. And he was shuffling his feet, kind of bent over, really didn't want to talk to me, kind of slurring his words. And I was just confused, really confused. And I said, well, he needs to maybe go to the doctor. He's not doing very well. Maybe he's had a stroke or something. And I was talking to my sister, I think it was just a few days later, mentioning, how bad he had looked. And she said, oh, I have to tell you, Mom said that he got the COVID vaccine. So my heart just sank. And I think that's what's happening. He's had a reaction. So I would go over there a few more times. Eventually he called me and he said, you need to come over here. I'm going to need help with my businesses. And I go, what are you talking about? So he said, just come over. So I went over. I was kind of in the same field as these businesses. I still am. But he said, I can't answer my phone anymore. He said, I can't turn on a TV anymore. I can't remember some things. I'm having a hard time talking. I don't think I can negotiate anymore on these things. I'm going to need help. And so that's when I really started realizing the neurological damage that was happening. I think most of it had to do with the brain, something going on in the brain. And it progressed. He had some things that I just have never heard before, even with so-called dementia, because of course the doctors kept saying at that point, oh, it's just dementia, it's dementia. But he totally knew what was going on with him. He understood that he couldn't do these things. And one day he's putting on his pants and he says to my mom, I don't know why I can't put my pants on. He said, I can't, here are my pants, here are my legs, why can't I put my pants on? And he started seeing things, like seeing people in the house. He thought there were various people walking around in the house. When we would say something like, Dad, there's no one here, you're okay, there's no one here, he would say, well, I see it, so can you just let me say what I'm seeing? And we're like, okay, yeah. And after that, I tried to just be reassuring and just say, well, you're okay, if they're here, they're not hurting anybody. But it progressed to get worse and worse to the point where he couldn't even watch TV anymore. He would sit in front of the TV. I think the Colts were playing football one day. He goes, what's going on with this horseshoe game? Why are they playing horseshoes? So he was looking and watching a football game he'd watched his whole life, and he couldn't understand it was a football game. So it just got to the point eventually where he would just sit on the couch or sit outside and just stare. He had no quality of life, nothing that he could do.
So it set in real fast after?
It went over, that happened probably over the next year. And it got pretty bad but even the Christmas, was it the Christmas before he died or 2 Christmas? I think 2 Christmases before he died. So a year and a half before he died. He was dancing. We were all dancing in the kitchen to some music, his granddaughters and me and my sister, having a pretty good time. At that point, he was able to move again, kind of walk again, but the brain part was not getting better.
And so where does the remdesivir come in?
So things had progressed pretty bad. He was having a lot of hallucinations, a lot of things like that. His legs had always, ever since he got the shot, had been really, really weak, like getting up and down out of the chair, those type of things. And he had fallen one day. My mom and him had COVID, and they really weren't that sick. It was kind of like really bad colds or flus, and he had fallen, I think on top of my mom. And they eventually got the paramedics, and paramedics said, you're okay, we don't think you broke anything, but do you want to go to the hospital and get checked out? And he said, yeah, I think I'd like to get checked out. So at the hospital, I heard he was going over there, and I knew they had COVID. I knew they were going to test him, and he was going to test positive. So I ran over to the hospital. I was only 3 minutes away from where I lived, 5 minutes away. And I said immediately, to the person I met at the front desk, to the nurse, to anybody that walked in that hospital room, he is not to be given remdesivir. I will take him out of the hospital if anything like that begins to happen. I sat with him all day for 8 hours, and I had to leave after that at night and go home. Well, when my mom got the bill, found out that he had been given remdesivir. He wasn't intubated or anything, but they had given it to him. I don't know if that's through an IV or how they even do that. A few weeks later, he was sitting in a chair, and all of a sudden, and the day before I had visited him, I said, "Dad, you look better than you've looked in a long time." His color looked great. He was, I said, "You look wonderful. How are you feeling?" He goes, "Oh, I don't feel very good." I'm like, "Oh, gosh, you look really good." His color, because he had always looked kind of gray, and his color had come back. And the next day, my mom called and said, he was sitting in the chair and he couldn't get up. And she asked if he should go to the hospital. He said, "I probably should." So found out he had a kidney infection. Really strangely, within 2 days, we don't know what happened, but he became, he was eating, drinking, walking around those first 2 days, and all of a sudden my mom went in to visit him the third day, and he was out, and he couldn't wake up till about 3 or 4 every day. Turns out they were drugging him terribly with keeping him sedated. And that went on for about 10 days until my sister was irate, called up there at the hospital and said, no more sedation. You can't keep him drugged like this. And they said they promised they wouldn't do it. We just found out that they had just switched the drug. They just switched whatever sedation drug they were giving him, and they were still sedating him. They came to us after he'd been in the hospital for 2 weeks and said, his kidney infection's gone, and we can't keep him here anymore, so you're gonna have to take him home. I'm like, he can't walk. How do I get him home? You'll have to call, a service, and they'll have to bring him on a bed. And he could still talk at that point. He really wasn't eating. He was not really aware what was going on. So we hired somebody to pick him up, take him home, called hospice to bring some bedding. Actually, it wasn't hospice at that point. It was a hospital service, some bedding and things. But within a day or two, he was on hospice, and 7 days later, he was gone.
What did they say on his death certificate? What did he die of?
Something to do with his heart, which no one had ever said anything to us about a heart, anything about his heart.
And he had 2 Modernas.
2 Modernas.
2 Modernas and some remdesivir.
Mm-hmm.
That'll do it.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that happened to your dad.
Yeah, he was a guy, I like to say, he was one of those guys that was larger than life. He'd done so much in his life. He was an F-4 fighter pilot, and flew for Northwest Airlines for a while, and started in business and did really well. People respected him. But my dad trusted his government, and he trusted his doctors. And I just feel like we were betrayed.
You were betrayed.
Yeah.
Are there any last words you would like to say to the people?
I just want people to be aware. I also had an incident with my daughter, had a very, very violent reaction to the tetanus shot. We've stopped everything. I just no more. He had issues after taking the flu shot for 3 or 4 years. He felt like he had the flu all the time for years. Just finally feeling better, right?
Right, definitely.
We just don't feel like that's a necessity. The people I know that don't do them are healthier than the ones who do. So I just want to, if I can help one person or one mother with babies, try to, just research. That's all I ask. Research it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for doing this. I'm really sorry about your dad. We're going to put a picture of him on the bus if that's okay with you.
Okay.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.